There's an island down in the Visayan Sea. The old ones refused to name. Not because they didn't know what to call it. They knew exactly what to call it. But they believed that naming a place like that was the same as sending it an invitation. They believed the way people believe things that have been true long enough to stop needing explanation. And some places, you do not invite. You visit carefully. You take what the sea gives you, and you go home before dark. That was the understanding. It had always been the understanding. Siquijor. That is what the maps call it. What the tourists call it. The old ones called it nothing. And they slept fine. The water around the island does something that is difficult to explain to someone who has not seen it. In the shallows, near the shore, near the fishing grounds the men have worked for generations, it is almost clear. Green-blue. You can see the sand below, the coral formations, the fish moving through them like slow smoke. Beautiful, even. The kind of water that makes people want to stay. But at the reef edge, it changes. The color drops. The clarity drops. The bottom simply stops being visible. Not because the water gets darker, exactly. Because what is below the shelf is not the kind of dark that light can fix. The reef continues down there. The fishermen know this. They have always known this. They just don't talk about how far down it goes, or what kind of things live at the bottom of something that deep. Because some knowledge is better left the shape it already is. Approximate, respectful, and quiet. Barangay Lazi sits along the western coast. Small place. The kind of barrio where everyone knows not just your name, but your father's name. Your father's opinion about the weather, and the exact way your mother used to hang laundry on a Tuesday. The fishing community there has worked the same stretch of reef for as long as anyone can trace back. The bunka is a narrow outrigger boat, hand-built, salt-worn, repaired so many times that some of them are more repair than original wood. The men go out before dawn because the fish run heaviest in the dark hours. This is not tradition for tradition's sake. This is just what works. What has always worked. They go out. They bring back what the sea gives. They go home. They do it again. Simple life. Good life. Mostly. The kind that does not require examination. Until something inside it breaks. Emil, Emilio Cabatingan, though nobody had called him Emilio since his grandmother died, had been born 4 houses down from the woman he would eventually marry. Salve, Salvacion Reyes, before she took his name. They had grown up running on the same strip of shore, stealing mangoes from the same tree behind the church, fighting with the particular intensity of children who spend too much time together and mistake irritation for dislike. By the time they were old enough to understand what they actually felt, they had already wasted several years pretending otherwise. They married young. Everyone said so, though nobody said it unkindly. Life was not easy. The catch was inconsistent. The boat needed constant work. There were months when money was thin enough that Salve would quietly reduce her own plate at dinner and tell Emil she wasn't hungry. And Emil would pretend to believe her, because that was easier than the alternative. Because that was love in its most practical and least spoken form. Their house was small. 2 rooms, a kitchen that was really just a corner with a gas burner, a window that faced roughly in the direction of the water if you leaned slightly left and squinted. But in the evenings, when the heat broke and the sea breeze came through that window, and Salve would sit on the floor with her back against the wall, humming something she only half remembered, and Emil would be outside checking the net by lamplight. Those evenings had a quality that neither of them had ever tried to name. Some things you don't name. Same reason as the island.
It was mid-April, the hottest stretch of the year, when the air sits heavy and even the water seems reluctant to move. The morning it started was an ordinary morning, the kind so ordinary it is almost impossible to remember afterward, except for the one detail that turns out to matter. The fishermen were at the shore before sunrise, bancas being loaded, the low noise of men working in the dark, equipment clanking, wood dragging on sand, the easy back and forth that happens when people are comfortable and awake and doing something they have done 1,000 times.
Kanor, ang taba mo na. Palamunin mo na yung bangka mo. Mas mataba pa rin si Emil kaysa sa akin. Manahimik ka.
Laughter. The kind that costs nothing. Emil laughed too, pushed his banca out into the shallows, climbed in, and paddled toward the reef the way he always did. What happened out there that first morning, he did not fully understand it himself. At some point, in the silence between the slap of his paddle and the low sound of water against the hull, something else was there. Underneath the surface sound. Not loud, not close. Something in the frequency of it that bypassed his ears entirely and arrived directly in his chest, the way a bass note from a speaker doesn't enter through the ears at all. It enters through the body. He sat still, listened. Then he told himself it was the current moving through the coral, picked up his paddle, finished his morning on the water. He said nothing when he got home. Salve noticed, but she did not know she noticed. That is the thing about people who have lived alongside each other long enough. The noticing happens below the level of thought. Something registers in the body before the mind has named it. She had set his dinner out. He had eaten it. He had said almost nothing. And she had found herself watching him a moment longer than usual before she looked away. She thought, he seems cold today. Maybe he was tired. Maybe the catch had been poor and he didn't want to talk about it yet. She let it go. She washed the dishes. she went to sleep. The second night, the same. Emil came home quieter than usual. Ate, stood at the window for a while before coming to bed.
Okay ka lang ba?
Oo naman, okay lang ako.
She almost believed him, because he delivered it with a version of his normal face. A good enough version. The kind a person produces when they are not lying exactly. Just withholding. She had known his face long enough to know the difference. She chose that night not to say so. The third morning at the shore, Mancanor nudged his son and nodded toward the water. Emil's banca was already far out, farther than he usually went for the morning run, sitting still when it should have been moving.
Anong oras pa pumunta yang si Emil?
Wala pa tayo dito, nandun na siya eh.
Mancanor watched the boat for a moment, filed it somewhere in the back of his mind without examining it. Men had quiet weeks. It meant nothing. Probably nothing. By the fourth night, Emil was not sleeping. He would lie down beside Salve, close his eyes, and something in him would refuse the rest. Not anxiety, not dread, something closer to anticipation, the specific wakefulness of waiting for something without knowing what it is or when it will arrive. He started going to the window. He would sit there for an hour, sometimes two, looking at the dark strip of water beyond the rooftops. He could not see the reef from their window. He could not see much of anything except the suggestion of water in the dark. But he sat there anyway. Salve woke once and found his side of the mat empty. She got up quietly, found him at the window, sitting on the floor with his back against the wall and his eyes on the water. She stood in the doorway for a moment.
Emil?
Matulog ka na. Okay lang ako.
She stood there a moment longer. Then she went back to the mat. She did not sleep for a while after. The fifth morning, he was at the shore before anyone else. Mancanor arrived to find Emil's boat already gone, already a shape on the water in the grey pre-dawn light, sitting still in the middle of the fishing ground. Not fishing, just sitting. Nako, Mancanor said to nobody in particular. He began loading his own boat and said nothing more about it. Because this is also what men do. They notice. They say nothing. They wait. Dodong, the youngest of the group, who had not yet learned the particular art of leaving things alone, called out across the water.
Paring Emil, maaga ka ah. May nakita ka bang isda dyan?
Emil's answer came back flat and short.
Wala pa nga eh.
Dodong looked at Mancanor.
Sige na, halika na kayo. Umalis na tayo.
Mancanor looked at the sea, and they went about their morning. What Emil was doing out there was listening. The sound had come back. It always came back. He had stopped pretending it was the current through the coral by the second morning. Too specific for that. Too directed. It felt like something that knew where he was. Something that had been making its way toward him for longer than he had been on the water. It sat below the surface of everything else. Below his own breathing. Below the slap of small waves against the hull. Below the distant noise of the shore. A tone more than a sound. Something in the frequency of it that the body understood before the mind had a chance to question it.
He did not feel afraid. That, more than anything, was what he could not explain to himself. Every reasonable part of him knew that sitting alone on open water before sunrise, listening to a sound that came from below the reef and had no explanation, was not something a sensible man did willingly. But the feeling that came with the sound was not fear. It was closer to recognition. The feeling of almost remembering something. A word on the tip of the tongue. A face from a dream, gone before waking. Familiar in a way that had no source he could name. He sat on the water. He listened. He went home. He said nothing. Mid-April became late April. Salve had stopped asking if he was okay. Not because she no longer wanted to know, but because she had learned, in the way that wives learn things they would rather not know, that the question was no longer reaching him. He was present. He ate. He came home. But there was a layer of him that had moved somewhere she could not follow. And the harder she looked for it, the further it seemed to go. She mentioned it once to her neighbor, Aling Cora, while they were hanging laundry.
Parang nag-iiba si Emil, ati. Bakit? May ibang babae?
Aling Cora said, because this was always Aling Cora's first theory about anything.
Hindi ganun.
Salve paused, looked toward the water.
Parang wala lang. Parang may iniisip na hindi niya sinasabi.
Aling Cora nodded the way people nod when they don't have an answer, but want to appear useful. Salve went back inside, folded the dry laundry, sat on the floor for a while, doing nothing. Salve was awake long before she let herself admit she was worried. She told herself he had stayed late with Mang Kanor. Then she told herself he had anchored the banca and fallen asleep on the water. He had done that once, years ago. Came home sheepish and sunburned, and she had scolded him for an hour. By midnight, she stopped telling herself things. She sat by the window, the same window Emil had been sitting at all week, and she looked at the dark strip of water beyond the rooftops, and she waited. The water gave nothing back. It never does. By sunrise, she was at Mang Kanor's door.
Si Emil Mang Kanor, hindi siya umuwi.
Mang Kanor looked at her face. He did not ask if she was sure. He did not tell her Emil had probably just lost track of time. He turned back into the house.
Anak, gising ka na. Hanapin natin si Emil.
3 boats went out that morning. They searched the fishing grounds first, then the reef edge, then further out than the men usually went, into the part of the water that the older fishermen tended to avoid without being able to say exactly why. They found his boat near the shelf, drifting slowly. No damage, no sign of struggle, no fishing lines in the water. Emil's paddle still resting across the gunwale, exactly where a man would leave it if he had set it down for just a moment and intended to pick it back up.
The boat was full of white flowers, dozens of them, covering the floor of the boat from bow to stern. The kind that grew on the hillside above the Barrio, nowhere near the water, nowhere a man alone on the sea could have gathered them. Freshly placed, still white, arranged, not scattered, the way flowers are arranged by someone who understood what flowers were for. Nobody said anything for a long time. The sea was completely still.
Walang bakas, walang Emil, puro puting bulaklak.